fish you see here at one of the highest points on Earth where any fish lives are the original native trout of Colorado, the greenback cutthroat trout. It's July now, springtime in the Rockies, that brief interval when the ice and snow melt away and things can grow and reproduce, as these fish are attempting to do. Like their relatives, the salmon, greenback cutthroat trout develop brilliant reddish coloration during their spawn. In the male greenback, these colors can look so bloody it appears that its throat has been slashed, hence the name cutthroat. Even when young, the greenback is strikingly attractive. When fully mature, however, there may be no other fish in the world more beautiful. But there's something even more special about the greenbacks. Over the millennia, they traveled thousands of miles, somehow crossing even the Continental Divide, to end up in the highest mountains of Colorado. But the incredible journey of the greenbacks still hadn't ended. Shortly after American pioneers arrived, the fish vanished so quickly they were soon thought to be gone forever. So the most amazing part of their journey still lay ahead, their comeback from the brink of extinction. Thanks to dedicated biologists, concerned government officials, and the help of volunteers, restoration of the greenback cutthroats is one of the great success stories of the Endangered Species Act. Today, they are finally safe to be enjoyed once again by the public. But how did these fish get to Colorado in the first place? According to scientific theory, our story begins in the North Pacific Ocean, where for millions of years an ancient fish swam these deep, cold waters. Over time, this fish evolved first into salmon, and then later into rainbow trout along the Pacific coast. From rainbows, the family tree branched again to become the earliest cutthroat trout. This coastal cutthroat is still living today along the rocky shores of the Pacific Northwest. But about 2 million years ago, climate and water conditions allowed the coastal cutthroats to swim far into the interior, beginning in the mighty Columbia River. From the Columbia, the fish entered the Snake River in Idaho, eventually reaching the high mountain headwaters of Yellowstone National Park. About 1 million years ago, these fish were cut off from the ocean by a giant waterfall, and from that point on, evolved in isolation. Gradually, they became what we now call the Yellowstone cutthroats. Then, about 50 to 100,000 years ago, an amazing thing happened. The ancestral cutthroats somehow crossed over the high mountain passes to the south, spreading downstream over the Colorado Plateau, and then up the Colorado River. How was this possible? Scientists say that most likely the fish were able to climb over these passes by way of ice dams or landslides. Trout from one basin were trapped behind the dams, which changed the direction of mountain rivers from one basin to another. When the fish reached Colorado, they quickly spread east up the Colorado River system until blocked by the huge mountains of the Continental Divide to become what we now call Colorado River cutthroats. Then, 10 to 20,000 years ago, the fish made another miraculous crossover, probably to the headwaters of the Poudre River. From there, they spread southward throughout the South Platte River system, and then into the Arkansas River over Trout Creek Pass. These two river systems became the range of the original greenback. Since human beings were in Colorado by then, it's possible that early Indians transported them over some of these mountain passes. But the fish could clearly do it on their own, since they had before. It still seems like a miracle, given the rugged terrain they had to cross. For thousands of years, the greenbacks prospered in eastern Colorado, until the arrival of the most formidable test they'd ever faced, the American pioneers. In scarcely more than the blink of an eye, the fish that took millions of years to evolve and travel to Colorado from the ocean were almost wiped out forever. When gold was discovered in Colorado in 1858, people poured in from all over the world to seek their fortunes. When they got to Denver, they found the rivers full of Rocky Mountain spotted trout, as greenbacks were known then, which were both easy to catch and good to eat.
Well, they were very plentiful, actually. If you went back 200 years ago, they're extremely plentiful. The reason they declined is overharvest and the introduction of non-native fishes. As people moved into the area, there wasn't the Albertsons and McDonald's to go have lunch or pick up groceries. People lived off the land. They shot deer, they shot antelope, and they fished. And since this area was a big mining area, people came in here, and there weren't really, when you get back into the early 1800s, there were no laws, as we know them today, that regulated harvest of fish.
The pioneers were also very destructive to the greenback's habitat. They cut down the trees that once lined the riverbanks and deforested the mountains to build their mining camps. They tore up the streams in their search for gold, dumping their mine tailings and garbage into the streams. They brought in cattle, which further degraded the streams by eating all the vegetation and caving in the banks, causing erosion and siltation. And they kept fishing, not just with rods and reels, but also nets and dynamite, taking huge numbers of fish at a time, often wastefully, just to brag. The pioneers must have thought the fish were inexhaustible, and they took as many as they wanted with no limits. By the 1870s, it became obvious that the native fish were disappearing at an alarming rate.
So there were really no regulations, so people really just over-harvested the fish. And then there was the desire to replenish the areas with fish, and that's when we got into fish hatcheries. Fish hatcheries actually started in the latter 1800s, is when fish hatcheries were built to replenish the fish that were really depleted and used up as people migrated into the West and worked and lived off the land. And so, as the fish that they stocked, unfortunately for the greenback was they tried to raise the greenback in the Leadville fish hatchery, but it was one of those species that was just not easy to raise. So it was abandoned, and over the years, things like brook trout and rainbow trout are much easier to raise, and so those are the species that are raised in fish hatcheries today, and they were stocked over the range of the greenback.
With development of the railroads, it became possible to import other species of trout from far away. Without knowing so, these early fish hatcheries delivered the death warrant for the greenback cutthroat trout in the form of competing species the fish had never faced before. The first of these was the rainbow trout from California, the easiest fish to raise in artificial hatcheries. This fish not only competed with the greenbacks for food and habitat, but as an ancestor fish could also mate with them. Wherever rainbows were introduced, the greenback gene pool soon disappeared into a hybrid form of rainbow. Next came the eastern brook trout, brought in from the eastern United States. The brook trout were deadly competitors with the greenbacks. Since they hatched in the fall, months before the greenbacks spawned in the spring, juvenile brook trout monopolized the food supply before baby greenbacks were big enough to compete. Finally, the brown trout was imported from Europe. Brown trout eat other fish. Where greenbacks had become bug eaters almost exclusively, brown trout became predators. And when the stomach of a big brown is opened, you'll often find smaller fish, like greenbacks, stuffed in its gut. All these events together spelled doom for the greenbacks. By the 1930s, Colorado's native trout had retreated to just a few isolated pockets in the very highest mountain streams and were thought to be extinct. But one man, Dr. Robert Behnke of Colorado State University, believed that greenbacks could still exist. So he set out to explore tiny protected tributaries of high mountain streams where they might have survived. In the late 1960s, he found a small remnant population that still existed in pure form.
So when I got here, I knew that cutthroat trout, were still around, but how would you know if they were pure greenback or not? In other words, the basic question was, if greenbacks still existed and you found them, how would you know? So by using the old museum specimens, we could get a pretty good diagnosis of what a greenback cutthroat was, and if we did find one, we could recognize it. And it turned out they weren't quite extinct, but they were very rare. So it was only in a few remote areas, say above a waterfall, where no other fish lived and no fish had been stocked, that you might find greenback. And we found at the campus, the University of Colorado has what is called the Arctic and Alpine Research Station down near Nederland area. And faculty there told us there was a funny-looking trout lived in this little creek that went through their property. And it was a tributary to North Boulder Creek. It has a big waterfall on it. And we went down there, and sure enough, we got a fish that looked very much like those fish in old museum bottles from 100 years ago. And everything since then has turned out, yes, they were a pure greenback. I know that was our first source of greenbacks to stock in other streams to restore them.
Benke and his fellow scientists pushed for the government to save the fish and try to bring it back. With passage of the Endangered Species Act in 1973, the first restoration projects began in Rocky Mountain National Park.
We're here at Bear Lake, which was one of the initial restoration sites for the greenback cutthroat trout here in Rocky Mountain National Park. And the restoration program got started in the 1970s, the early 1970s. Bear Lake was completed in 1975. And since then, we have completed 19 restoration projects, and 11 of those have become stable reproducing populations. Part of the reason for that is that we've got 265,000 acres that we protect here in the park, and within that we've got many, many headwater streams and lakes that are pristine and have suitable habitat for greenback, so it's been the perfect spot to complete the restoration projects.
It used to be a little more primitive in those days. We packed the fish, we caught the fish out of Como Creek and put them in a garbage barrel in the back of a pickup and drove them up to the park to the Stanley Hotel where a helicopter met us. And we didn't lose a one. They all survived. It was quite a cold day. And they were helicoptered into a little barren stream at the very north, fork of the North Big Thompson River, I believe it was. And they were stocked. So that was our very first, greenback restoration in the park.
Under the Endangered Species Act, a greenback recovery plan was created, and a cooperative recovery team was put together, including officials from the Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, BLM, U.S. Army, and the Colorado Division of Wildlife. The team leader was Bruce Rosenlund, who's been working on greenback restoration projects for 20 years. These projects were so successful that the greenback was soon downlisted from an endangered to a threatened species status. Now let's follow along as a greenback recovery crew goes into the high country and see the actual process of restoration at work. The first step is finding suitable protected habitat and removing competing fish with a biodegradable poison. Then the task becomes taking eggs from mature spawning greenbacks to replace them. Like salmon, greenbacks are compelled to swim upstream to spawn. From a pond, they'll go up an inlet brook, even one as tiny as this. And if they can't get up an inlet, they'll settle for an outlet and swim downstream instead. Usually, though, they'll go up a small headwater tributary stream as far as they can and spawn there. Unlike salmon, they don't die after they finish, but live on to spawn another day. The fish are captured by electroshocking with portable battery backpacks and probes. The jolts of electricity momentarily stun the fish, which can then be safely handled without injury. The shock is mild and the fish quickly get over it. After being collected by nets and buckets, ripe female fish are slowly and carefully squeezed along their bellies to force out the ripe eggs for fertilization. In a similar way, male fish are gently milked of their sperm, called milt. Once there's enough of both, eggs and milt are mixed together. Fertilization happens almost instantly, usually within 30 seconds. The fertilized eggs are then carefully packed for traveling back down the mountain to a fish hatchery, where they'll be cultivated. After the eggs are taken, A detailed procedure is followed to make records about the fish population sampled. Each fish is individually weighed, then measured, and finally clipped with a tag to identify it when caught again. When all the measurements are recorded, the fish are returned to the stream. In an hour or two, they're back to normal. Now the scene shifts to the hatchery, a safe, controlled environment where survival is often 30 times what it would be in the wild. The fertilized eggs brought back from the mountains are spread out in trays and placed in incubators, where they're given a constant flow of pure cold water, simulating natural stream conditions. In a few weeks, the eggs hatch into what are called sac fry. In the first days of life, they live off their yolk sacs, much like a tadpole. Gradually, they become swim-ups, meaning they're old enough to leave the nest and compete for food. By the time they're a year old, they're 2 or 3 inches long, big enough to put back into the wild and start a new population of greenbacks. Now the fish take another incredible journey, sometimes by airplane.
So anyway, from the cabin with these rods and so on here, where I can select individual tanks. We have a large hopper here underneath them. And
Goes in the same tank.
then I can trigger the dump on the bottom hopper with an electronic trip on the yoke. And our optimum situation is about 75 feet high and about 65 miles an hour. And that presents some problems on some of the lakes because you have such a steep descent to make into the cirque. But we take what we can get, and we find our mortality's 3-4%
Is that all?
on the drop.
Really? That's
Predation probably takes more fish than the drop does.
Today, these little greenbacks are going to travel the old-fashioned way, by horse. Our destination is a high lake above Leadville in the upper Arkansas River drainage. This site was chosen because most greenback recovery thus far has taken place in the South Platte River drainage. There are still only a few populations in the Arkansas River headwaters, and this will be one of them. With a few more like it, the greenback can be taken off the threatened and endangered species list altogether. At the trailhead, a hatchery truck unloads the fish needed for the day's stocking. The fingerlings are placed in a special container for the trip to keep them cool and healthy. They're then loaded onto pack animals. In this case, Wally, the reliable old fish-hauling horse. In pioneer days, fish were moved the same way, using milk cans.
This hooks the oxygen into the sides.
Well, this is a good site here because it gives you kind of an overview of the project here. When we started the project,
After a couple of hours, the crew comes to the area where the baby greenbacks will be stocked. The fish are unloaded, divided up, and crew members are sent off to different places to stock them.
I told you I should have put them. Yeah, just go ahead and put those in the lake up there.
Just
It goes up quite a ways. Just go ahead and stock those out to the different ponds through the inlet here. I'll just start. That's it. Go forth and prosper.
They'll grow at the rate of about 3 inches a year until maturity. when they can get as big as 22 inches and 5 or 6 pounds with suitable habitat.
When the Endangered Species Act was enacted, there was only we only knew of about 3,000 greenbacks that existed that was left in the entire state. Or I should say 2,000 greenbacks that was left in the entire state. To give you a feel of how few fish that is, today on this upper basin here, we've stocked 6,000 fish. So we stocked out 3 times as many fish as we knew that we had in 1973. If everything works out as we want it to, this will be the last year we'll have to stock it, and this will end up establishing a stable reproducing population of wild fish, and that's our ultimate goal in here, is having a wild population of greenback cutthroat trout.
Besides restocking the fish, Rosenlund's work also includes trying to find other remnant populations of the greenback cutthroat that haven't been rediscovered yet. In this case, a fisherman reported catching unusually marked cutthroats in a tiny creek almost 11,000 feet high. When identified as pure greenbacks by Dr. Benke, Rosenlund organized an expedition to check it out. With consent from the private landowner, a survey crew hiked in to test the creek by electroshocking and fly fishing. The first fish was taken by the fishermen, showing how eager the greenbacks are to take any food they can get. Rising out of the depth, a fish whacks the fly. This thrilling attack is the fisherman's greatest joy. It's definitely a greenback.
The really large circular spots concentrated towards the caudal fin or the tail fin, very characteristic of the greenbacks. The only cutthroat trout of all the subspecies that have spots this large are the greenbacks. It's one of the characters we use to identify them. That's just a perfect example of what the greenback looks like right there.
But as the study continues, it becomes obvious that greenbacks are the minority here. The creek is dominated instead by brook trout, and the greenbacks are outnumbered, almost 20 to 1. Further testing reveals that all the greenbacks found here are several years old, even the smallest ones. Hopes fade that this is, in fact, a stable, self-reproducing population. In the presence of brook trout, greenbacks always seem to lose.
60? 220?
It's still a mystery how this population of greenbacks survives, but they do, and that makes them all the more important for future research. Another part of the recovery process is the help of volunteer groups who donate their time to help government officials undo the damage of the past. At this site, which looks so lovely now, it was once a huge trash dump left by woodcutting and railroad activity in the 19th century. The Wild Trout chapter of Trout Unlimited from Denver took on repairing this creek as a special project. Restoration of ruined areas like this is crucial to help the greenback complete its journey home. In the final steps of the process, the new stream bank is replanted with willows to hold the soil in place. Watered carefully, and old fence posts taken down for public access to this pretty little valley.
With the budget that I have, it's real difficult for me to, if I didn't rely on volunteers, I wouldn't get very much done. Volunteers make up easily the volunteer time and effort and money that they're willing to contribute makes up easily half of the work that I get done out in the district, out on the ground. And without that, I would feel not nearly as successful as I do right now. Again, it's hard to imagine what this area looked like before, but right now you can see the grass waving in the breeze, this knee-deep grass, whereas before we were looking at just stubble, 1 to 2 inches, real barren landscape. And here comes a duck right now. It's just delightful now, though, to see this knee-deep, healthy landscape, healthy vegetation. It's just beautiful. It makes me a very happy camper.
The final journey of the greenbacks began in 1993, when Trout Unlimited volunteers teamed up with government officials and launched a campaign to make the greenback the official state fish of Colorado.
And let's see if we can get it into, at least if not this legislative session, at least next year. So this group, and as a reflection of the plan, can see, we're moving toward that. I do not believe it's going to be that tough to sell.
In 1994, the Colorado legislature approved a bill to make the greenback the state fish, thanks in good part to testimony from biologists at the Division of Wildlife. On March 15, 1994, Governor Roy Romer signed the bill into law.
Congratulations to all of you who made this happen.
By giving the greenback official state fish status, Colorado's government both atoned for the destructive past and guaranteed the greenback a safe future. So what is the future of this amazing fish, which held out against all odds? While the greenback is now secure, it still only occupies a tiny fraction of 1% of its original range. They are safe, but still rare. Because non-native fish dominate most trout streams in Colorado, greenbacks will never reoccupy anything close to their original territory. Natural predators like birds they can handle, but not competing trout species. Another problem is foreign diseases brought in by commerce and trade. The most serious is called whirling disease, which brings a quick, early death to younger trout and permanent disfigurement to older ones. Fortunately, the greenbacks seem safe behind those high protective waterfalls, at least for now. In the end, the fate of the greenbacks is a public issue to be decided by the citizens of Colorado. Will they want a continuing policy of stocking non-native fish, which nature never meant to be in Colorado in the first place? Or will they want a more balanced policy, an expanded program of restoring native cutthroats and rebuilding populations of wild fish?
Wild fish epitomize precisely what it is that we as fishermen like so much. To be able to go out and spot a wild fish, be able to catch that wild fish, and then return that wild fish to the wild so he may reproduce and give us more enjoyment later in his life. Catch and release, from my standpoint, is the only way to fish for trout. As Lee Wolf had said, a trout is much too beautiful to only catch once.
For now, we can all take pride in the miraculous comeback of the greenbacks and be grateful to those who made it happen. Thanks to the Endangered Species Act, this beautiful fish is now protected by a team of professionals, volunteers, and children, all determined that the Colorado greenback cutthroats will succeed.
The Sierra Gorda Queretana, our home, one of Earth's most beautiful, abundant places. A special place, yes? The Sierra blesses us with so many gifts. Gifts of soil, rocks, water, plants, and animals. And among her animal gifts are the birds. Did you know that there are almost 300 different kinds of birds who share these mountains with us? Surely every day each of us notices the birds singing at sunrise, following the plows in the afternoon, and settling into the trees at evening. Maybe some of us remember to thank the birds for their color, their song, their being. Usually, most of us forget. We must all begin to really think about what the Sierra Gorda's birds, our birds, need to live healthy lives. If we do not, fewer and fewer birds will be able to survive here, and our forests will one day be silent. In some ways, our lives and the birds' lives are very similar. You and I and the birds all drink the Sierra's water, gather food from her land, and make our homes in her forests. In other ways, our lives are very different from theirs. Let's take a closer look at the lives of the birds of the Sierra Gorda. We can know them better. We can discover all of the helpful things birds do for us. We can learn what we can do to help our bird neighbors. And we can decide together to make the Sierra Gorda a safe place for all of her incredible birds. Our creeks and rivers and springs are precious. We all need water to live. The birds need water for many things, too. Of course, like us, they drink the water. They take baths in our rivers, creeks, and ponds. And many birds eat the insects, plants, and fish that live in or near the Sierra's waters. Dippers walk in the creek, picking small animals from the rocks along the bottom. Rivers and ponds are a great place for birds to find their insect meals. Spinning like a top, this Wilson's phalarope brings insects to the surface of the water by kicking its feet. See all the insects in the air above this river? This tufted flycatcher is catching insects in the air. Insects that were born in the water. Some birds, like wood ducks, love to eat the plants that grow in the Sierra's ponds. And of course, there are the fish in our waters. They are important food for many birds here, like the great blue heron. With their sharp eyes and fast necks, they can catch fish and other animals easily in the Sierra's waters. Long-legged birds like killdeer push their beaks into the mud along lakes and rivers to pull out the worm-like animals living there. The birds and you and I all depend on the clean, fresh waters of the Sierra Gorda for our lives. And we all depend on the gifts she gives us for our food. Many birds feed on the flowers, fruits, and seeds growing on so many different kinds of plants here in our mountains. This gray silky flycatcher is eating small berries from these trees. Black-headed grosbeaks crush seeds open with their short, strong beaks. So do crimson-collared grosbeaks. Seeds are filling this painted bunting's tummy. They are the bunting's favorite food. Isn't this a beautiful bird? Red crossbills use their amazing beaks to pry seeds out of pine cones. And who eats the rats and mice that live in many places throughout the Sierra? Birds of prey like the kestrel and the red-tailed hawk. How perfect are the feet and beak of this Cooper's hawk for catching and eating its food. Maybe you have seen the amazing black vultures of the Sierra. They poke their featherless heads deep into the bodies of dead animals for a meal. When they are finished cleaning the bones, they clean each other. Other birds eat insects that live throughout the forests. This Scott's oriole can reach them with its pointed beak. Woodpeckers like to eat insects too. They use their strong beaks to dig into trees for insects, and then they reach them with their very long tongues. This golden-fronted woodpecker found its meal in a crack in the tree. Woodpeckers have strong beaks and heavy necks for digging other kinds of holes in living and dead trees. They make these nest holes, or cavities, to lay their eggs and raise their babies. Big, old trees are the best places for them to do this. Many other birds depend upon the woodpeckers to build their nest cavities. One year, the woodpeckers did not come back, so these bluebirds used it. Ferruginous pygmy owls also use cavities made by woodpeckers. Of course, many kinds of birds build their nests out on tree branches. Most often, they choose places that are covered by other branches. This protects their eggs and babies from the hot sun and hides them from other animals who might eat them. When spring comes, some of our birds fly north to the United States and Canada to build their nests and have their babies. These long-distance flying birds must be very healthy to travel so far without getting exhausted. They depend on the Sierra's food, water, and shelter to help them get in shape for the trip. Townsend's warblers, like this one, live in our mountains in the winter. This bird is nesting in the United States. In the fall, the parents and their babies will fly to their Mexican winter home. All birds, those who are traveling through our Sierra and those who live here all year round, need places to rest. Many different kinds of birds will use these resting places, or roosts, and they can get very crowded. These incredible birds are all around us, eating and having families and singing right beside us in our Sierra Gorda home. Do you know that they are helping us in many ways, too? They are helping to control insects that could hurt our trees or our crops. And some, like this white-eared hummingbird, are spreading pollen. This will make sure that our beautiful flowers make the seeds needed for new plants to grow. And many birds are spreading those seeds throughout the Sierra. The fruits and seeds they eat come out later in their poop. Just think, a pooping bird could have planted the bush outside your house or school. There are birds who help control the mice that eat our corn. And there are those who eat the smelly dead animals that you and I would never be brave enough to clean up. Bravo, birds! And of course, they help make our lives beautiful with their color and their song. Our beautiful and important birds need your help. Life in the Sierra Gorda is getting harder for them because of some of the things we do. We poison the water, cut the trees, and some people kill or trap our birds. When washing clothes in rivers and creeks, do not use bleach nor detergent. These are poisons to the insects and the birds. Use soap only. Do not use bleach, nor detergents, nor other poisons in the creeks nor rivers. Some kinds of garbage, like plastic, turn into a poison as it breaks down in the soil. This is bad for everyone, including birds. Put garbage in its place. Insecticides kill insects. That is the bird's work. Many birds die from eating insects poisoned by insecticides. Never use insecticides. The Sierra used to have many more trees, many more places for birds to eat and nest and roost. We must bring those places back. We must plant trees wherever and whenever we can. Killing and trapping wild birds is selfish, and it is also illegal. Tell your friends not to kill birds. And remember, you decided to make the Sierra Gorda a bird trapping-free area. If someone is trapping birds, report them. Our birds do not belong in cages. Never kill nor trap wild birds. Watch birds. Talk about them with your friends. Ask your teachers and families about them. Do the best you can to learn about your birds. Welcome them as your neighbors. Learn everything you can about birds. The birds are our brothers and our sisters. They depend on the same things we do to live here. Healthy forests and grasslands, clean water and air and soil, and space to move around in. Now you know more about birds and the amazing ways they live their lives. And you know about some of the ways birds help people. Now you, the children of the Sierra Gorda, can work together to keep your land beautiful and healthy for everyone, for the birds.
We are making huge changes to the environment in all of this region. I mean, they go all the way through here. They're indicative of life here on the coast. They're indicative of life in the Willamette Valley. They're indicative of life all the way into Idaho, you know. And we are having enormous impacts on them. I mean, they're a perfect example. I mean, I don't think there's any other species that catches what we're doing any better than the salmon do.
We kind of look at the 50s as a breaking point. Prior to the 50s, the loggers left a lot more behind them. And right now we're cutting what those loggers left behind. After the 50s is when the clear cuts came in. Anything cut in that period isn't producing anything that anybody can use to produce money, to produce income for the local economy today.
over 50% of spawning habitat for trout and salmon around the country is found on Forest Service land. So these national forests are hugely important for the resources and the economies which depend on trout and salmon.
We stood out there for 2 hours, this man and I, and all he wanted was a couple small rainbows, and that really shouldn't be a very difficult thing to deliver on a river that looks as great as the Yak. We didn't get them. The bread and butter, so to speak, of my livelihood is return clientele. And while we all would love to have clients that don't necessarily want to catch fish and that they just want to learn an awful lot about it and have fun standing in the stream, the reality is they're here to catch fish. And if the fish aren't there, I'm done for the day. I'm done for more than a day. I'm done for, you know, I've lost a client.
Clear-cut logging has taken place in our national forests for decades. With clear-cuts and logging roads come landslides and increased erosion. The silt pollutes once clear creeks and streams, destroying the spawning grounds of trout and salmon. This jeopardizes an important industry.
Sport fishing contributes about $28 billion, that's billion dollars, not just $1 million, to the national economy. In some places around the country, sport fishing is the lifeblood of local economies. Places like western Montana, the Pacific Northwest, and many other places around the country, sport fishing makes the economies go. So anything that's going to further degrade the watersheds which these resources and the industries depend on is a big concern to us, and that's why we're so concerned about the salvage program.
The salvage program Moyer refers to was kicked into high gear last year when Congress passed a bill to speed up clear cutting on national forests across the country. The bill suspended all environmental laws, doing away with the safeguards that have protected some of our national forests in the past, such as the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Water Act. This so-called salvage rider is allowing the cutting of once illegal timber sales that had been stopped because of the disastrous effects they would have on wildlife habitat. These problems don't remain in the forests either. Salem, Oregon's capital, is just one recent example of clear-cut troubles washing downstream. Salem was without its regular drinking water supply for over a month because of mud in the river.
The flood of '96 happened in early February 1996, and by February 7th, the river had become very muddy, the North Santiam River, which is our water source. It was so muddy that our water treatment plant was not able to treat the water.
The recent floods we had were considerably more severe and more costly precisely because of the manner and the extent of the logging that we've had in the Northwest. It is costly to the economy, it is costly to taxpayers, it is costly to water rate and sewage rate payers throughout the Northwest.
Just one industry alone lost more than $2 million during the past flood. They had to bring alternative sources of water to their industry, and they had to shut down for a while. They had lost revenues. There were people that had to stay home from work during that time. That's just one. We have not assessed all of the businesses, but I'm sure there was quite an impact.
We cannot destroy the very basis of our economy, which is the natural environment. That's where all wealth comes from. That's the source of all jobs. That's the sustenance for all of our economies. Timber, fish, tourism, everything.
Representing the largest commercial fishermen's organization on the West Coast, Glenn Spain emphasizes that environmental protection for national forests is good economics.
There is a fishing emergency in this region. There's also flood damage, enormous flood damage from the last floods that exacerbate the problems. Meanwhile, these sales proceed step by step by step to clear cut in areas that never should have been touched, would never legally have been available under any existing law, but for the logging rider that suspends all the laws. And so from our viewpoint, it's devastating. It's economically devastating. It adds yet another burden to our industry while benefiting for a very short period of time a few mills who then will have to lay off their workers as well.
The Northwest salmon fishing industry has already lost 72,000 family wage jobs over the last 20 years. Clear-cutting in critical watersheds, in conjunction with dams, livestock grazing, and mining, is destroying the rivers and the few surviving fish populations. Wild fish stocks people are working to bring back.
Why are we any different than a steel worker, or why are we any different than a textile worker when the jobs go out of the country, or a shoe manufacturer when they make them in Taiwan? You know, we're no different, and we shouldn't be viewed any differently. But I think the resource that we depend upon is the big difference here. That's something that we should care about. Losing that resource, losing the salmon, I think would be absolutely tragic.
Gary Greenwell is a logger and an economist in Idaho promoting responsible logging that maintains a sustainable forest and a sustainable livelihood.
Clear cutting is a boom and bust type of cutting. You got all this forest, you go out and cut her down, and then you wait for it to grow back. But what happens to the community that built up around the first cut? It is important to us to leave behind a good, healthy, growing forest that's going to produce timber for our descendants and is going to maintain this ecosystem as it is to take something out so that we can make a living, okay? What we take feeds our families. What we leave feeds our soul, and it also feeds our descendants, feeds our children, our grandchildren.
Because of the salvage rider, public forests like this could be clear-cut at any time. In addition, the salvage rider is not making any money for the government. Rather, it costs the taxpayer an extraordinary amount of money every year. Hard as it is to believe, these programs are money losers, and the American taxpayer foots the bill. Logging our national forests is, in economic terms, below cost.
Well, first, the salvage timber rider needs to be repealed. Second of all, it needs to be challenged in terms of fundamental U.S. forest timber policy. I don't think that we should ever allow below-cost timber sales, which in the last 3 years, the General Accounting Office has estimated, has cost the taxpayer $1 billion. $1 billion to pay for the timber companies to build the roads and provide the infrastructure and then sell our timber on our land at below cost. And so are we going to have to wait for the next nuclear power disaster, for the next inversion in air pollution, for the next devastation of ocean fisheries, before we wake up and realize that good environmentalism is brilliant economics?